Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Brendan Kelleher. I spent a lot of time recently talking about the Star Trek movies, but I haven't covered the actual TV series very much. So just to give my personal opinion on the various shows, I thought I'd rank them all here worst to best. This ranking will not cover the various animated TV series. This list is for all the live action series. I myself am not a huge fan of the classic Star Trek animated series from the 70s. I've seen it once, but I've never been really compelled to revisit it, despite the fact that I'm a huge fan of the original live-action series. It was good for its time and had some interesting ideas, but the animation was very primitive, even by 1970s standards. It was pretty cool that they got most of the original series cast to return, but altogether, my overall opinion on that show was meh. The current animated shows Lower Decks and Prodigy, they're just not for me. I think I've watched about one episode of each show, and it's just not Star Trek to me. I realize it's made for a younger audience, but they are more of a parody of the franchise more than anything else. Not to get ahead of myself, but they're almost as bad a parody of the Star Trek franchise than Discovery. So, yeah, again, they're just not for me. I realize that they have their fans, and that's great. You enjoy what you enjoy. The history of Star Trek on television can be broken down to three distinct eras: the original series era of the 60s, the Rick Berman era of the late 80s through to the mid 2000s, that was TNG, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. And finally, the current Alex Kurtzman era of Discovery, Picard, and Strange New Worlds that has been ongoing since 2017. So here we go with my ranking of the Star Trek shows ranked worst to best. So coming in right at the bottom is Star Trek Discovery, or Star Trek Disgracery as some fans call it. Yeah, there wasn't much competition here. Discovery is, in my opinion, the worst Star Trek show by far. Unlike most of the other shows on this list, Discovery actually didn't start out too bad. Coming out over a decade since the cancellation of Enterprise in 2005, it must have seemed like an oasis for Star Trek fans, having been deprived of new Trek on television after so long. Discovery had many problems right at the start, being yet another prequel to the original series. The technology depicted in the show looked more advanced than the Next Generation era, let alone the classic era. Everything from the giant view screens and holographic communications were all clear cases of canon violation. Yeah, I know, this was a show made in the modern era, and you have to accept that there was no way this was going to look even more primitive than the original series looks now. But still, this could have been avoided if the show had been set in the Kelvin timeline, or yet another parallel universe. Michael Burnham as a character is, like Rey in the new Star Wars movies, just a Mary Sue who seems to be great at everything, and her links to Spock's family were completely unnecessary and make no sense in the lore of the original series. This was a case of the writers just trying to make the character seem more important than she should be, by connecting her to one of the most iconic characters of the entire franchise. And if that wasn't insulting enough, making her a mentor of sorts to Spock. While I wouldn't exactly call Sonequa Martin Green a bad actress as such, her character is just way too emotional, with many scenes of her just crying. You can see season by season playlists here on YouTube of her just crying. And this lady becomes a captain later on?
Sob and wail and throw myself at your feet.
You were a little busy.
Anyway.
This could all be forgivable if Discovery was a well-written show, but it just isn't. Every season there seems to be an end to all existence threat to the galaxy by some anomaly or such, and it's just tiresome. Some of the best Star Trek stories are actually small character-driven affairs, with personal stakes for the crew. But Discovery goes out of its way to make Burnham, as the critical drinker calls her, an intergalactic space Jesus. The supporting cast isn't great either. Tilly is just an insufferable idiot who should have never been allowed into Starfleet Academy, given how unfit she is, and the writers' attempt to make her funny just fall flat most of the time. She's also very unprofessional. Like with a lot of the crew, there seems to be no military discipline on this ship, which is another example of terrible writing. By the third season, the writers' woke intersectional feminist agenda couldn't be more clear, with straight white males pretty much gone from the main cast. I gave up watching early in season 3 as it just got so bad. The show did have a few highlights, however, with the likes of Jason Isaacs and Anson Mount bringing a lot of gravitas to the early seasons. And I did enjoy some of the Mirror Universe episodes. But overall, Star Trek Discovery is just awful. A complete embarrassment to the franchise, and I'm glad it's coming to an end. Number 7. Star Trek Picard. If you had asked me a few months ago, Star Trek Picard would have given Discovery serious competition for the bottom spot on this list. Set 20 years after the events of Star Trek Nemesis, the show follows a retired Jean-Luc Picard as he gets involved in all kinds of galactic threats, along with Voyager veteran Jerry Ryan returning as 7 of 9. A Mexican Han Solo type whose name I can't even remember as he's so forgettable, a female foul-mouthed scientist, and Raffi, an old friend of Picard who initially at least is tied with Tilly for being one of the worst Star Trek characters ever. Star Trek Picard is a show that's hard to be objective about. For the first 2 seasons, the show was a complete train wreck. The writers seemed to go out of their way to have just about every character put Picard down, insult him, and make him look like an idiot. Especially one particularly foul-mouthed Starfleet admiral.
Sheer fucking hubris.
Like Discovery and a lot of modern Trek, the show has a woke feminist agenda with lots of girl boss moments. There's also a lot of extreme violence and swearing, with frequent uses of the F word. This does not resemble the positive, uplifting future of the Star Trek future at all, which is supposed to be a big part of its appeal. Jean-Luc Picard is a character that works best when he's with his old crew. On his own, he's just not that interesting. Even Patrick Stewart seems to be playing a completely different character from his time on Next Generation. It seems like he's playing himself at times. This is most evident in Season 2, with the subplot involving his aunt, which apparently is based on Stewart's real life. 7 of 9 is brought over from Voyager as a series regular here. And even though I love the character as played by Jerry Ryan, again she seems to be played as a completely different character from the one she played for 4 seasons on Voyager. Not saying she's bad or anything, far from it. It's just different. The less said about the nonsensical plots of the first 2 seasons, the better. The 3rd season of the show, which is overseen by executive producer Terry Matalas, has saved the show from being a total train wreck. In short, Season 3 has been absolutely brilliant, with the entire Next Generation cast being reunited over the course of the season. It's just pure fan service, with terrific villains in the form of the changelings from the DS9 series, nostalgic callbacks to previous Trek series, which actually furthered the main plot along, and a real breakout performance from Todd Stashwick as Captain Shaw, who certainly deserves his own spin-off show, The Crew of the Titan. Overall, while the 3rd season has done a great job of redeeming the show, the memory of those horrible first 2 seasons linger, hence its placement near the bottom of this list. Number 6. Star Trek Strange New Worlds. One of the few positive aspects that came with the otherwise terrible Star Trek Discovery was the presence of Jason Isaacs as Captain Lorca in Season 1, and of course, Anson Mount as Captain Christopher Pike in Season 2. Pike took temporary command of the Discovery during that season, and was an instant hit with old and new fans alike. With the character's departure at the end of the season, there was an active fan campaign online for Mount to have his own spin-off, chronicling his adventures on the Starship Enterprise 10 years before Kirk took command in the original series. Strange New Worlds is very much a love letter to the classic original era of Star Trek. While the show still retains some of the hallmarks of modern Trek, like race swapping of already established characters, unnecessary swearing, and breaking of established lore, the show has an old school charm anchored by Anson Mount's terrific performance. In a break from modern tradition, the show more or less ditches the serialized format of modern television and tells mostly standalone stories in an episodic format, very much like the original series. There are a few personal storylines that carry through, like Lieutenant La'an Noonien Singh's emotional trauma as a result of being a survivor of a Gorn attack, Spock's ongoing relationship troubles with his fiancée T'Pring, but most of all, Captain Pike facing his unavoidable destiny of being involved in a horrible accident which will lead to Kirk taking his place as Enterprise captain. What really sets the show apart from the likes of Discovery and the early seasons of Picard are the very appealing supporting cast. New characters such as Lieutenant Ortega and Lan Noonien Singh could have come across as total cliché, strong female characters. While they are that to a certain extent, the writing for these characters and the charming performances make you care about them. The mostly standalone stories have a good variety to them, and like the best of televised Trek, cover different genres like action, comedy, and horror. The best part of the show overall, though, is a return to Star Trek's overall sense of optimism and a hopeful future. While there are one or two episodes that are not so great, the first season of Strange New Worlds is one of the strongest debut seasons for any Star Trek show, and I'm really excited for its future. Number 5. Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I know, some people are going to be annoyed at me placing Deep Space Nine at this point on the list. For a lot of fans, I'm sure, DS9 comes at the top of their ranking, but I've never felt that close a connection to it. First show of the franchise to really shake up the formula, DS9 was mostly set on a space station, which didn't really go anywhere, or as some critics called it, boldly stayed still. DS9 was a hard show for me to get into, and not just because of the change from a Starship show to a space station one. Unlike previous Treks, the show wasn't about exploring space, but of dealing with interplanetary politics and Bajoran mysticism, and the main characters didn't appeal to me as much. Avery Brooks is a good actor, but there were times that he acted completely over the top, and it was unintentionally funny. There are plenty of YouTube playlists out there of Sisko acting angry, but here's a small sample.
I want to know why my science officer's been transferred without my consent. I want to know why my chief of operations is lying in the infirmary while the Jem'Hadar who beat him is free to walk the station. You go ahead, call them! Call anybody you want. They can't do anything to me. Not anymore. And nor can any of you. You're Starfleet officers. Now start acting like it. Have you read Worf's after-action report? Isn't it possible that there were no civilians on the transport Worf destroyed? Isn't it possible that the ship he saw was sending out false sensor images and that this whole affair was staged? And I want to know why the Federation is willing to risk a war with the Romulans to form an alliance with a group of people that we hardly know and barely trust.
Are you finished?
I haven't even begun.
While the main cast are all fine, I think part of the reason I never gravitated to them as much as the other Star Trek crews is because the supporting cast like Dukat, Garak, Martok, Lita, Rom, and Morn, let's not forget Morn, I find more interesting. I honestly don't think the series would have lasted that long if it hadn't been for the Dominion Founders storyline that really kicked off at the end of Season 2. This storyline would develop over the course of the rest of the series and result in all-out war breaking out by the end of Season 5. While the show still did many standalone episodes, it's this kind of long-form storytelling, like its rival space station show at the time, Babylon 5, that has really made the show stand the test of time and make the show ideal for binge-watching in the current streaming era. Like its sister show Voyager, the series was really in need of a HD upgrade to bring it into the modern era. At the time of recording this video, the series is still only available on standard definition on DVD and streaming services. When you compare it to the glorious remastering work done on the likes of the original series and TNG, it's a real shame that the show currently doesn't look its best. Number 4. Star Trek Voyager. With the end of the Next Generation in 1994, and DS9 being a primarily space station-based show, Star Trek Voyager was created to keep the ship show banner of the franchise going on television. Conceived as a cross between Lost in Space and Battlestar Galactica, the show depicted the Federation starship Voyager being lost in the far-off Delta Quadrant. Voyager seemed to represent an opportunity to break from continuity by separating itself so far from the Alpha Quadrant, where the majority of Star Trek stories have been told. It was a chance to build its own mythology, with new alien races, and the addition of the Maquis crew on the ship was a chance to include some of the character conflict that DS9 had been able to utilize in its non-Federation space station setting. However, a lot of this potential was squandered as the Maquis presence on the ship was pretty much downplayed after the pilot episode, to the point where they may as well have been a full Starfleet crew all along. The show also came across as TNG light on many occasions, in more than a few episodes. The Borg, which are such a fearsome presence in TNG, became little more than a punching bag for Voyager after a while, and the show came very close to becoming the 7 of 9 show when she came aboard. Despite all this, however, I have a real soft spot for Voyager. Kate Mulgrew as Captain Janeway is one of the great Star Trek captains as far as I'm concerned. This is a role that could have become cringeworthy and tiresome in a lesser actress's hands, but Kate Mulgrew always gave a terrific performance in even the worst episodes of the series. And like the best Star Trek captains, was the glue that held the ship together. In fact, out of all the Star Trek shows, I think Voyager may have the best cast of female main characters. The likes of B'Elanna Torres, Seven, and the aforementioned Janeway are all awesome. Seven herself is iconic for reasons. Kes was possibly the weakest character overall, which is probably why the show didn't really lose that much appeal when she left. I think it's a character that didn't really work, and I feel sad for the actress Jennifer Lien, as I feel the writing was the reason the character just didn't pop, so to speak. I think it's fair to say that Voyager, despite its great setup, didn't really break much new ground. It tried to do a DS9 style ongoing story arc with the Kazon in the early seasons, but they wisely, I think, put an end to that at the start of the third season, as those guys just ended up being poor Klingon ripoffs. The show did have some great recurring villains like the Hirogen and the Vidians, and despite using them too often, the Borg would feature some truly great episodes, like Scorpion and Dark Frontier. Overall, despite facing a lot of criticism at the time as being possibly the weakest of the Star Treks, Voyager has aged well, and it's the show that I turn to when I just feel like a random standalone Star Trek adventure. In that sense, it was a very safe show and comforting, but it was that comfort factor that was part of its appeal. Number 3, Star Trek Enterprise. Enterprise was the first Star Trek show in decades at that point to be set in a different era than TNG, DS9, and Voyager. Taking place almost a century earlier than the time of Captain Kirk, Enterprise was very much an attempt at being the right stuff of Star Trek. An attempt to get back to basics and portray mankind's first exploration to deep space, where there was no Federation and no Prime Directive. A true voyage into the unknown. Like Voyager, the show's original concept was gradually thrown out in favor of standard Star Trek storylines, and the show suffered an identity crisis during its first few years. The central trio of Archer, Trip, and T'Pol seemed to be an effort to recreate the big three of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy of the original series. As time went on, this relationship changed quite a bit, with Trip and T'Pol forming a long-running on-again, off-again romantic relationship. Enterprise is a show of two distinct halves. The first 2 seasons are very average, with no clear direction, as the show is very episodic, with some adventures being very reminiscent of past Star Trek series. There are a few recurring arcs, like Archer and the crew's frequent run-ins with the Andorians, particularly Shren, played to perfection by Jeffrey Combs. Shren was one of the breakout characters of the show, and was a frequent guest star over the course of the show's 4 seasons. It wasn't until the 3rd season and the beginning of the long-running Xindi storyline that Enterprise began to find its own identity, and the show's quality really jumped up a notch. The Xindi arc was something never before attempted in the history of Trek, telling a long-running storyline over the course of an entire season, as the crew attempted to find and stop the Xindi from destroying Earth with a superweapon. This was possibly inspired by the success of 24, but it was in the show's 4th season that the show lived up to its potential and original premise, very much acting as a prequel to the events of the original series, such as the founding of the Federation, and laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the Romulan War. Enterprise, like the original series, was a show that was sadly cancelled before its time, but it told some of the best stories of the entire franchise. And it's good to see that time has been kind to it, and its reputation has grown over the years. Definitely one of the most underrated Star Trek shows in my opinion. Number 2, Star Trek, the original series. So Star Trek is very dear to my heart. I grew up watching the original show, and the follow-up films are some of my favourite movie experiences as a young boy growing up. I just love the central trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. They're very much the foundation that the entire franchise is built on, in my opinion. The on-screen chemistry between William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and DeForest Kelley is just incredible, and I genuinely don't think the series would have had quite the same impact if the originally cast Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Pike had stuck with the show. Not that Hunter was bad in the role, far from it. But from the moment Kirk and Spock share the screen in the second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, it genuinely feels like they've been playing these characters for years already. As for the show itself, despite its dated production values, the show truly broke new ground for science fiction storytelling on television. Concepts that we take for granted these days, like time travel, mirror universes, genetic engineering, and others, were popularized by Star Trek. Episodes like The Doomsday Machine, Amok Time, Mirror Mirror, and of course, City on the Edge of Forever are all classics, and amongst the finest small-screen science fiction ever televised. In a way, the show is the opposite of Star Trek Picard, While the latter had a terrible first 2 seasons, only to be saved by a stellar third series, the original series started out very strong, with a very consistent high quality of episodes, only for the show to fall apart in its third and final series. The final season is infamous for having some of the worst episodes of the entire franchise, like Spock's brain and Plato's stepchildren. But there are still a few series highlights like the Enterprise incident and Day of the Dove. Just as a quick side note, I actually do think the remastered episodes with the upgraded effects is the best way to watch the show nowadays. I've always found the effects and remastering work done on the show to be very successful for the most part, and really enhance the series, not to mention making it more palatable for younger viewers, which leads us to number 1 on this list, Star Trek The Next Generation. Star Trek The Next Generation is a show that shouldn't have worked, the first spin-off from the enormously popular original series and movies. There was a lot of fan backlash at the time at the audacity of doing a Star Trek show without Kirk, Spock, and the rest of the original cast. But despite a rather weak first 2 seasons, the show hit its stride in its third year and never looked back. The Next Generation quite simply represents the most fully realised vision of Gene Roddenberry's creation. Over the course of its 7 seasons, there are just so many terrific standalone episodes that have stood the test of time, like Yesterday's Enterprise, The Drumhead, Darmok, and of course, The Best of Both Worlds, which is a strong contender for having the greatest cliffhanger in the history of television. Despite the rough start, this particular cast on-screen chemistry came together very quickly. Patrick Stewart as Captain Jean-Luc Picard is just amazing. From his very first appearance, Stewart never gave a bad performance, even in the very worst episodes. And it's because he was so different from Captain Kirk that was part of his appeal, as far as I'm concerned. Brent Spiner's Data was a character that in a lesser actor's hands could have easily come across as a Spock clone, but Spiner gave the character such an appealing innocence, despite his great intelligence and strength. The rest of the cast took a little while to grow into their characters. Jonathan Frakes as Riker was very much a clone of Will Decker from Star Trek The Motion Picture in the early episodes. He even shared the same first name. But Frakes' natural charm and personality made him a very appealing character after a while, and the chemistry he had with Marina Sirtis as Troi was always incredible. Michael Dorn as Worf is just awesome, and despite LaForge and Dr. Crusher possibly being the blandest characters on the show early on, the writing and acting for both improved particularly by the third season. Overall, while the original series may be my nostalgic favourite, the sheer number of the quality of episodes and the incredible screen chemistry of the entire cast, except for Wesley. Sorry, Wesley.
Sir, I know this may finish me as an acting ensign, but
Shut up, Wesley!
Makes Star Trek The Next Generation the best Star Trek show of them all, in my opinion. If I had to introduce someone to Star Trek, this is the one I would recommend. It's a phenomenon that continues to this very day. At the time of this recording, the entire cast has been reunited in the excellent third season of Star Trek Picard. And there you have it. That's my ranking of all the live-action Star Trek shows, worst to best. What do you think? Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Click the bell for notifications, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye for now.